Hey everyone, so it's time for you all to understand something about the Monster Trio. For the longest time in the New World, there's been this constant, incessant debate regarding Sanji's place in the Monster Trio, whether the Monster Trio is still a thing in the New World, whether the dynamic ever really even existed in the first place, whether Oda has decided that Zoro is a fighter and Sanji is mainly a chef, etc., and enough is enough. In the wake of the most recent chapter, where we finally got a clear, definitive depiction of the classic dynamic of Zoro and Sanji, still very obviously alive and well in the modern day of One Piece, 1,000 chapters in, it is time to put this seemingly never-ending discussion to rest. I have put out 3 videos in the past detailing why people regularly get Sanji wrong, why they get his place in the Monster Trio wrong, and why a lot of people make bad assumptions regarding the Monster Trio in general. But the problem with those videos is that they came out at a time when a lot of people were still skeptical because people wanted to see in-story proof. People wanted to see proof that yes, Oda was going to continue depicting Sanji as one of the 3 main fighters of the crew and the left-hand man of the Pirate King, as well as a rival to Zoro. Well, now that it seems like we're getting that proof in the story, I want to put an end to the debate. So in this video, I'm going to be going over 3 points that hopefully make it so I never have to listen to "Is Sanji still part of the Monster Trio?" ever again on this channel. First, I'm going to be revisiting what I call the Sanji cycle. Second, I want to address how the Monster Trio dynamic has actually functioned since the start of the series. And third, whether or not that's going to change with the introduction of Yamato. But before we get into it, make sure to subscribe for more One Piece videos every week. So, to start with, the Sanji cycle is something I discussed with this video, the Straw Hat Oda hates. And the point I made was that no, Oda does not hate Sanji, but rather that Oda tends to follow a bit of a cycle when it comes to his long-term treatment of Sanji. Because out of Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji, Oda definitely has a preference for Luffy and Zoro, which makes sense as they are the 2 primary characters in One Piece that Oda is able to focus in on as sort of the embodiment of drive, superhuman will, larger-than-life spirit, etc. Sanji's appeal is more so the more laid-back, honestly normal guy who considers himself a cook first, yet is still just naturally such a monstrous fighter that he is able to stand side by side with these other 2 when the time comes. But because Sanji is not fundamentally at his core Oda's depiction of will, drive, and ambition personified the way that Luffy and Zoro are, Oda does tend to be a lot more lax with Sanji's portrayal throughout the series. Oda is far more okay with regularly giving Sanji the short end of the stick, whereas Oda is often very careful with making sure that Zoro isn't ever made to look bad unless those rare situations where he is up against a truly overwhelmingly powerful opponent. Oda is very regularly okay with having Sanji have some quote-unquote bad showings, or to be used as a tool to hype up other characters or villains. Because Oda is okay with doing this, Sanji will often go through multiple arcs, even hundreds of chapters, where he is not portrayed in the best light, and where it may seem like he is solidly behind Luffy and Zoro, only for Sanji to finally come through with some really big moments that clearly depict him as being right up there with the other 2 members of the Monster Trio. So for instance, between Arlong Park and Alabasta, Sanji was actually notably very inactive for many arcs in between. He was sidelined, injured, treated as a gag, while Luffy and Zoro would get the lion's share of the big moments and impressive feats during that time. Then came Alabasta, where Sanji finally had to put everyone else on his back as Mr. Prince, as well as getting a big win over Mr. 2. Now, after that, we got another cycle where from Skypiea all the way through literally the train fights on the way to Enies Lobby, Sanji in that entire span of time had pretty much 0 big wins or feats, and to most readers, at that time it seemed very clear that Frankie was stronger than Sanji. Only then finally was it actually time for the big 1v1s of the arc. That is when Sanji got his shine again, taking out an opponent who was pretty much exactly equal to Zoro's opponent, and for the rest of pre-time skip, Sanji continued to get feats that were certainly comparable to Luffy and Zoro. And so then we finally entered post-time skip, where at least towards the beginning, Oda showed us that yes, the Monster Trio dynamic was still very much a thing, It's just that as the New World progressed, we went into basically the longest, I'd say, down cycle for Sanji ever. I am not going to nitpick every little thing that happened that, Sanji fans were upset about, but there have just been many, many, many moments where Sanji has not looked the most impressive, and even if you somewhat excuse all those little moments individually, giving reasons for this or that, the least that can be said is that it's been a long, long time since Sanji has had what one could call a major win. I'd say one chapter into Wano, and Zoro already had an infinitely cooler moment than Sanji had for the entirety of the New World up till that point. Now here's the thing. I was always confident that Sanji would get a return to form in terms of portrayal, because the point that Oda usually pushes Sanji back into the limelight is when we get to a big showdown where all the Straw Hats are going to get their 1v1s. So for example, Alabasta was a huge arc for reestablishing Sanji as one of the crew's big three, and then after a long time again of no great showings, Enies Lobby was another huge arc that re-established Sanji's place among the crew's big three. So I always felt like even though we were lacking a lot of impressive battle moments from Sanji for a long while in the New World, that just sort of made sense based on how Oda likes to do things, as Wano would be the arc that we would finally expect to be the big showdown of the New World where everyone would get 1v1s, and naturally that always seemed like the point where Oda would make sure to finally re-establish that yes, Sanji is still one of the big three of the crew. And it seems like that is pretty much exactly what we're getting. This whole scenario gives me big Kaku and Jaibura vibes, Zoro and Sanji taking on the top two henchmen who themselves have a rivalry with each other, not to mention the similarity of how in Enies Lobby, Zoro initially had to take on Kaku and Jaibura at the same time by himself, with Sanji coming in to save the day. Whereas in Wano, we got Sanji taking on King and Queen at the same time for a bit, with Zoro then coming in to save the day. So all in all, look, just because Oda seemingly underplays Sanji for long periods of time, I don't think that he thinks like we readers do, because we live very much in the moment and based on what the most recent events are, whereas Oda obviously has the full story in mind. So for Oda, it seems like it's the big arcs like Alabasta, Enies Lobby, and now of course Wano. Those are the arcs where Oda actually cares about showing how strong each Straw Hat is, as naturally those are the arcs that the Straw Hats will all get their big battle moments. So really those are the arcs where it matters, where Oda can make it clear that the monster trio, including Sanji, are a cut above the rest. And it's really just for the arcs in between where Oda is fine sort of giving Sanji the short end of the stick just to hype up other characters, so on and so forth. The only reason the New World felt different is that this has just been the longest period of time we've ever had before getting to that big showdown arc where all the Straw Hats finally get their major 1v1s. So Sanji's, period of suffering, at least in the eyes of some readers, was longer than usual. Now let me address the monster trio in general, because I've been talking about the big three, Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, how Sanji clearly belongs in that group, etc., etc. But the big point of contention that also comes out of this, that I have also talked about in depth in a past video, is what is the real duo among this trio? Because we can all see that throughout the series from the very beginning, there was this special dynamic of Luffy and Zoro, the captain and the sometimes equally impressive first mate. Zoro, who seems to be the only crewmate capable of standing shoulder to shoulder with his captain in battle. They have this very interesting dynamic where obviously Luffy gets the biggest wins, the most glory, he seems like he's the strongest, but at the same time, there is always an argument to be made that at times Zoro is very much portrayed to be certainly comparable to Luffy. However, then there is this other dynamic that is just as prevalent throughout the series, which is the rivalry between Zoro and Sanji, as over and over again, we see these two paired with one another as trying to outdo each other in some way, often being depicted as having similar accomplishments, essentially playing the role of the right and left hand of the Pirate King, basically with Luffy being clearly ahead, but Zoro and Sanji as his primary pillars of support. And so this complication leads to tremendous amounts of debate and toxicity among the community, because there is so much evidence to find throughout the series that it's Luffy and Zoro as just this next level duo ahead of everyone else. And yet so much evidence to find throughout the series that it's Zoro and Sanji who are clearly being portrayed on the same level, definitively behind their captain. And the tricky part that is certainly intentional by Oda is that he makes sure that Sanji is never implied to be equal or even comparable to Luffy, which creates this maddening conversation of readers trying to make sense of it then. Which is it? Is Zoro closer to Luffy or is Zoro closer to Sanji? Essentially, what is the duo within the trio? And the answer that I told you guys before, that no one listened to, that now I think is being very, very blatantly demonstrated in front of our eyes, is that there is no constant answer. The answer is that Oda prefers to keep the portrayal fluid and ambiguous. He likes the flexibility of being able to write Luffy and Zoro as this special duo who are just on another level, with Zoro being able to stand shoulder to shoulder in battle with his captain as the ultimate right-hand man. But then Oda also likes to write Luffy as the standalone strongest, with Zoro and Sanji being a clear level below him, together as his right and left-hand men. That's it. That's the answer. The answer is that there is no definitive answer. It's fluid. Some days it's Luffy and Zoro seeming like equals, other days it's Zoro and Sanji seeming like equals. That's the way Oda likes writing the dynamic. And if you don't believe me, then look all the way back to the beginning of the story and then look at it today, because it's been the same from the start. Nothing has changed. The first time in the story that the question came up of who was stronger, Luffy or Zoro, was in Whiskey Peak, which led to a fight that essentially was an inconclusive draw. However, the very next arc, Oda raises a similar discussion with Zoro and Sanji with the hunting competition, which again results in an inconclusive draw. And it should be noted, of course, that the hunting competition was an obvious parallel to Dory and Broggy's never-ending rivalry to find out who is stronger, which was also perpetually an inconclusive draw. So literally in back-to-back arcs, Oda is portraying Luffy and Zoro as comparable, and then portraying Zoro and Sanji as comparable. Oda flip-flops, and we see the exact same thing in Wano. You can go back to Act 1, where it felt like the dynamic that Oda was really playing up was Luffy and Zoro. And this is the Luffy-Zoro arc, the big two of the crew. Then you go to Act 2, and the Zoro-Sanji dynamic seems to be back in full force. But obviously what we really care about is the big fights, right? Well, to me, nothing better symbolizes the essence of what the Monster Trio dynamic is, and really the question of what is the duo within the trio, than when we got to Onigashima. And it's literally visually symbolic. As I said, Zoro stands like the idea that the Monster Trio dynamic is something like this, with Luffy and Zoro at the top, and Sanji solidly behind them below. And it makes sense. Luffy and Zoro are the two Straw Hats who have the most battle-centric dreams. They're the two supernovas of the crew. They're the only two Straw Hats with Conqueror's Haki. They're the two kings of the crew. Now, Sanji stands prefer the idea that the Monster Trio is like a pyramid, with Luffy as the captain, the leader, the unquestioned strongest, and Zoro and Sanji are his number 1 and number 2 guys, the right and left-hand men, the two pillars of support on the same level, as Robin says, the two wings of the Pirate King. And they even have this little rivalry with each other because they are on the same level. Now, with Onigashima, what we got was so visually symbolic, deliberate or not, by Oda. Because the battle starts with us getting heavy emphasis on that first dynamic, Luffy and Zoro as the premier duo. There's been so many jokes about, quote-unquote rooftop level, but it's not really a joke. The rooftop was the most elite level of the Battle of Onigashima. That is where the highest level of combat was taking place, symbolically above everyone else. And it was Luffy and Zoro fighting up there together. The only two Straw Hats who were up there, the captain and his right-hand man. Zoro fighting side by side, essentially as Luffy's equal for a long time, protecting him, scarring Kaido, etc. It was here that it was established that Luffy and Zoro are the two kings of the Straw Hat crew. Both Luffy and Zoro are conquerors, which makes them fundamentally different than the rest of the Straw Hats. Sanji was, of course, during all this time fighting down below, or not even really fighting. Some might say he was sidelined and being made to look bad yet again, while Luffy and Zoro got all the glory. But just when it seems like Oda established that the Luffy-Zoro dynamic is really where it's at, that the Zoro-Sanji rivalry isn't that important to the story anymore, literally immediately after that, we are back to that other classic dynamic instead. Suddenly, we have Luffy up top fighting the big bad boss on his own, while we have Zoro and Sanji as the right and left-hand men of the Pirate King down below, fighting side by side against the same opponents. So suddenly it feels like Luffy is above them both literally and figuratively, and Zoro and Sanji are back to being on the same wavelength, his two pillars of support doing what needs to be done down below, and they're now fighting on the same level. Again, whether it's intentional or not, this Battle of Onigashima provides a very literal visual depiction of how the Monster Trio discussion goes. Is it Luffy and Zoro up top on their own, above the rest of the crew, including Sanji? as has frequently been played up throughout the story? Or is it just Luffy at the top and Zoro and Sanji as his wings on the same level together below him, as has also been frequently played up throughout the story? The answer is just that it's both. 1 minute it's Luffy and Zoro together on the roof with everyone else below them. Next minute it's just Luffy on the roof with Zoro and Sanji holding down the fort below. I strongly suggest people stop arguing about whether or not Zoro is closer to Luffy or closer to Sanji in strength, because it's literally however Oda feels like portraying it at any given point. I say that, but I know the arguments will never end. Now lastly, Yamato. How will Yamato change things? The answer is she won't, so just shut up about Yamato. This is the most infuriating thing people bring up with regards to the Monster Trio. How many times do we have to go through this before people realize the Monster Trio will literally never change? The Monster Trio is probably Oda's favorite dynamic in the entire series. It is so stupidly, ridiculously prevalent throughout the story that it is actually insane to me that some people literally needed this quote by Robin to reaffirm that fact for them. If you have the barest level of reading comprehension, it should be obvious that Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji are a very, very special trio in this story. Just because another strong character joins the crew doesn't mean Oda is going to suddenly change one of the fundamental character dynamics that the Straw Hat crew is built upon. I tried to tell you all this in my video back when everyone was talking about how Jinbei was going to change the Monster Trio, but no one listened back then. And today, now, when everyone's finally realized and moved on and accepted that, no, guess what, Jinbei won't be part of the Monster Trio, look what's going on. Now I've got to listen to the same shit about Yamato, and it's like, guys, come on. How many times do we need to go through this? How many times does it need to be shown that Oda isn't changing the Monster Trio before it just becomes obvious? If you're a longtime reader, you'll remember how many times we've been through this. We've been through this with Frankie, where throughout Water 7 and the Sea Train battles, it seemed like Frankie was stronger than Sanji. Then the big fights of Enies Lobby happened, and Oda just moved Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji forward, so it was clear that they were ahead of Frankie. Same thing today with Jinbei. People were saying that Jinbei was stronger than both Zoro and Sanji, but by the time the Wano fights came around, it's now clear that no, Oda is just moving Zoro and Sanji forward. They fight calamities, Jinbei fights a Tobiropo. And yet people just jump to the next thing. They're now trying to argue that Yamato is going to change things. Like 5 chapters after it became clear that Jinbei is not going to be grouped with Zoro and Sanji, people are already trying to move on to the next character to displace the Monster Trio, Yamato. Listen, first of all, we still have no idea if Yamato is going to join the crew. Second of all, it is extremely hard to gauge Yamato's strength at the moment, as one moment she was stalemating with Ulti, and another moment she is fighting Kaido. You could argue that Yamato probably didn't go all out against Ulti, but by that same argument, I'd say I heavily doubt Kaido is going all out against Yamato either. Finally, even if Yamato is as strong or stronger than Zoro and Sanji are right now, guess what? Oda's probably just going to do the same thing that he always does anytime new strong characters are added to the crew. The same thing Oda did with Frankie, same thing he did with Jinbei. He's just going to make Zoro and Sanji stronger and bump them ahead and preserve the Monster Trio. That's literally it. We've seen it multiple times before. Sanji is due for an upgrade this arc. We've already got a glimpse of what Zoro's next upgrade looks like. It's not that complicated. I don't know how many times we have to see and be told that the Monster Trio is a thing, a very important dynamic in the story, before realizing that Oda's not just going to introduce random stripe number 11 or 12 or 13 or whatever 1,000 chapters into the story to just change everything. So if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like, comment, and subscribe, and you can get my extended thoughts on this and all future topics on Patreon, link in the description below.